Hi everyone, and welcome to a new video. So today I want to discuss why you shouldn't be overstretching when you're dealing with lower back pain and piriformis syndrome, even though you're feeling that constant tightness in your hips. And I wanted to share with you what you can do instead so that you can deal with the pain and manage the pain without making the pain worse. I do want to start by saying that in my very early days of dealing with piriformis syndrome and back pain, and my early days were actually a few years, I was just stretching all of the time. I wanted to find any excuse to take a break so I can go and stretch, because stretching felt so good and it provided me with relief while I was doing it. And I really thought it was going to be the solution to my pain. So unfortunately, that never happened. I never got long-term relief from stretching alone. I only would get relief during the stretching. So when I was stretching, I felt good. But right after that, it would either things will just tighten right back up and I felt the pain again, sometimes even worse. It was actually only after I reduced and minimized stretching that I started to see some real results. So this video is going to summarize what I did and why you shouldn't be overstretching or doing too much yoga and static stretching, even though you may get advice to do that. First of all, I want to say that stretching has its place in your recovery, in your healing. Stretching has its place. It relaxes the nervous system. It improves range of motion. It also has benefits in restoring proper alignment. Your posture can be better if you start to stretch, especially the upper body. And I do include it in all of my program, but I use it intelligently. So number one, you are probably wondering, why is stretching either not helping or making the pain worse? A lot of times people with lower back pain, specifically sciatica, herniated disc, they will start stretching a lot, but the pain either doesn't go away or it gets even worse. So right after they finish stretching, the pain gets worse. And that's something that I experienced too. I want you to keep in mind that your lumbar spine, the lumbar area, needs more stabilization than mobilization. The lumbar area needs to be supported, and actually it needs a little bit of tightness to do that. So your lower back area needs to be a little tight. So the lumbar spine is surrounded by stabilizing muscles such as the transverse abdominis, and these muscles, they tend to be really weak, and they weaken over the years just because, you know, we're sitting a lot. We don't really know how to engage these muscles properly. So they tend to get weak over the years. And what happens is that weakness leads to either an injury or chronic lower back pain. And then instead of actually focusing on strengthening and tightening that area a little more, and even in the case of a herniated disc, you actually need to be supporting the lumbar spine to allow the disc to heal naturally. In the cases of a herniated disc that's not very advanced, that doesn't require surgery. So we need to be strengthening those areas so that they can do their job to stabilize and support the lumbar spine. If you do have chronic lower back pain, either or not associated with a herniated disc, or if you get sciatica symptoms as well, I highly recommend that you start to include more deep core stabilization exercises and reduce a little bit on the stretching, especially if it hasn't been working out already. So, you know, it's already not helping. This is a sign for you to switch to another strategy. There's also something that happens in the case of chronic muscle pains, that we're in pain so much for so long that the muscles, they start to become really sensitive to pain triggers. And when we start to overstretch, the muscles can easily get irritated because, you know, every little thing is irritating the muscle, and now you're overstretching and over lengthening. That can also act as a trigger for the muscle to spasm. So this is very particular to piriformis pain, that, you know, it's like it just wants to act up to anything. If you sit too much, if you stand too much, if you stretch too much. So the goal is to just not irritate the muscle as much as possible, work around, because the less sensitive the muscle is to the pain, the more we can stay pain-free and avoid flare-ups. The second thing why we shouldn't be overstretching, there are Phasic and Tonic muscles, and they both have different, they're both designed to do different things. There are muscles that are more designed to hold our posture. And these are muscles that can tighten up really quickly, such as the hip flexors. So these muscles will tend to tighten up and shorten really quick. And then there are muscles that tend to get weaker, such as the glutes and the deep core muscles. So we don't spend enough time strengthening these muscles. And also we spend a lot of time sitting, doing things that weaken these muscle groups even more. And then when we experience pain, we will go and stretch the glutes, creating more length and more weakness. So it's very important to know which muscles to stretch. So I do tend to spend more time releasing the hip flexors, but still I don't overstretch them, but I realize and I assess when they are over tight, or if I spend, for example, a few hours sitting without a break, that I know that I should probably release my hip flexors. So my next point here, which is the muscle really tight? Is it really tight? Not just feeling that it's tight, but is it actually short? Is it overactive? Because I know that you're probably thinking, but my hips are constantly, they feel tight. I have to stretch them, and I do understand that, because I used to feel the exact same way. Sometimes I do. I'm like, oh, I should probably stretch my hips, knowing deep down that it's probably not my hips. So muscles behave like a rubber band when it comes to extensibility. So if you stretch a muscle and you release it, it's going to go back to its original length. So just keep that in mind. Stretching has a lot of other great benefits, as I mentioned, and one of it is actually improved flexibility and range of motion, but it's not going to release any tightness. It's not going to release any trigger points that are shortening the muscle. So the first step is to actually find out, is the muscle actually tight? And the only way to do that is to test it and see how it is affecting the other muscle, how it's affecting the movements, how it's affecting your posture. I do have a post that I have specifically actually for piriformis muscle and how to test if it is short and if it does need to be released. So check that out. Once you realize that the muscle needs to be released, then you can go ahead and do the release exercises and include some stretching as well. I want to include some very important guidelines for you to remember once you start to feel that tightness or the piriformis is, tightening up, spasming again. I know exactly the feeling, it's like you start doing something, it's, you're constantly thinking about it. It's always in the back of your mind. Like you go for a walk, you're sitting doing something and you can start feeling that, feel that tightness developing. Avoid rushing and think back to all the activities, all the things you've done. Perhaps there's something specific that's contributing to that right now. Is it your posture? Did you do a lot of exercises in the past day or the past few hours? A lot of times it's something that has triggered it. And I know that sometimes it comes out of nowhere. I know that happens, but 80% of the time, it's something that has triggered either a trigger, like a movement, sitting too much, standing too much, bending over in a weird way. There are little things. Even stress sometimes can trigger it. So it's important to keep track of when you feel pain and what you've done before that, because over time you're going to start to see patterns of certain activities you're doing that are contributing to the pain. And so the next thing is to avoid stretching before you exercise. Too much stretching can reduce the muscle's ability to contract during exercises. So we don't want to be stretching right before we're doing strengthening exercises. So what I like to do instead is I like to foam roll and release the muscles to self-myofascial release before I go ahead and exercise, because self-myofascial release also acts as a warm-up for the muscle. So you're not only releasing trigger points, or you're releasing tightness. So for me, that's kind of the first step in warming up. The second thing is, please reduce or completely stop stretching the piriformis before you know if it's actually tight. You're probably already stretching the piriformis every day over and over again. And if the pain hasn't gone away, what's the point of keep doing something that is not leading you to long-term relief? I would switch my strategy into finding out if the muscle is actually tight, if the muscle is actually weak, and maybe switch to doing more self-myofascial release and more strengthening exercises and reducing your stretching, the next thing is to focus more on strengthening the opposite muscle groups as well as the hip stabilizers. Spend more time activating the glute med, the glute max, the pelvic muscles, the transverse abdominis. Spend a little bit more time on strengthening as well as and then working on your inner core every day. And maybe when you're done exercises, you can include 1 or 2 stretches at the very end. But I would focus more on strengthening with minimal stretching. Again, after you do the test and figure out if the muscle is tight and needs to be stretched. And every day I want you to practice good spinal hygiene and good posture, because when we have good posture throughout the day, we maintain muscular balance. When we are sitting in a weird way for a prolonged period of time, when doing some repetitive movements and just, like sitting in just bad posture, it will tend to shorten certain muscles for a long time. And then when we don't balance that with release and strengthening the opposite side, then we tend to kind of that posture will become more of a permanent thing. I'm not saying permanent as you can undo it, but you'll start to walk like that. You start to sit the same way. It kind of becomes ingrained in your mind, and then you have these very tight muscles that are really hard to release. But if you start practicing good posture, you can maintain muscular balance. You don't have to, it doesn't have to get to the point that your muscles are extremely tight all the time. And I know that it can be really hard to keep falling back into that cycle of stretching, temporary relief, because it does feel good when we're stretching due to the stretch reflex. But think of it this way. You've already been stretching so much for this long, and if it hasn't provided you with a fix, maybe it's time to look at a different strategy. And that was kind of my wake-up call. I was just doing it over and over again, 1 hour a day at least spent just stretching. And so I would encourage you to look at the cause of all this pain, to keep assessing for muscular imbalances. And even if you have a herniated disc, it is possible to get better. But if you work with your body to get better, it will be way easier than just kind of doing guesswork and throwing things at the wall and just doing so much and hoping that something is gonna work. I will have a lot of resources for you below this video, including the post that I made on how to test for piriformis syndrome, and I will have some additional videos and articles about specific to lower back pain and how, for example, to bend over, how to have good posture if you have a disc issue. So I will include all of those below. And thank you for watching. I really hope this video has been helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time.